Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Gershom Margolis. I'm the founder of Imperial Advisory. We're a fractional CFO firm, and I'll tell you more about us in a moment. I'm joined today by some wonderful people from our team. My partner, Bob Doyle, two of our CFOs, Buddy and Barry, who you'll be hearing from all three of them today, and Jennifer, who makes sure everything happens on time and as it should. So thank you all for joining us today. All right. A little bit about our firm. Imperial Advisory is we're a group of fractional CFOs. In a large organization, the CFO is often the CEO's most trusted advisor. So the benefit to companies using fractional CFOs is you get that experience, but you get it for just as much as you need. It's a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time. Several of our CFOs, I think all of the ones on the screen right now, have experience that goes beyond just being a CFO. They've been CEOs or COOs, sometimes both. And many of the people on our team have 30, 40 or more years of experience. I'm the anomaly in that way. So we kind of pick up where accounting and bookkeeping leave off. We're not as focused on historical things. Usually the accounting team takes care of that, and we're kind of forward looking and helping the business grow into the future. One of the things that we come across in our work, and that many of our CFOs have dealt with over their long and wonderful careers, is mergers and acquisitions. Companies are looking to make acquisitions, they're looking to sell themselves, they're looking to merge, and having someone who's done that in the past at their side is a great thing for a CFO. Anyway, that's what we're here to discuss today. Thank you all for joining again, and hopefully you'll learn a lot here. All right, so I'm going to start by going across the screen, starting on my left, going to my right, and we're going to ask our CFOs on the panel today to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit how they got into M&A. So, Bob, would you like to start? How did you get into M&A?
Yeah, so hi, my name is Bob Doyle.
Bob, we're having trouble hearing you.
Sorry about this.
My computer keeps picking up the wrong microphone. Is it better now?
Yeah, much better.
So I started back in the mid '80s in a family-run business. After being in that family-run situation for a few years, the family sold the business, and ultimately a firm came in and we rolled up the industry. So I became involved in acquisitions fairly early in my career, and what we did was we purchased initially it was predominantly family-run businesses throughout the United States. We did primarily tuck-in acquisitions, which basically means that we were expanding in the exact same business we were in and saving the overhead to the acquired companies. Eventually, we got into buying more professionally run larger companies, and eventually purchased our largest competitor. Acquisition experience, we added over $900 million in revenues through acquisitions throughout about a 30-year period. So that's my background.
Thank you. So, Buddy, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into M&A?
So I'm with Bob. I'm in the 40+ year category. When I was very young in 1983, I was a strategic planner at Pacific Telephone, which, if those of you have never heard of it, was part of what was called the Bell system, and we broke up the Bell system in 1982. And Pacific Telephone went public in 1983, and I was responsible for writing the business plan for Pacific Telephone of California, Pacific Telephone of Nevada, and the publishing company that we owned, which made yellow pages for Jennifer, who's never even heard of a yellow page. We owned that business. So we went public on a when issued basis in 1983 and went public in 1984. And even though I was young, I was on the sidelines for most of that. And that was a really exciting experience, especially for a 24-year-old. So that's how I got into M&A. Like Bob, then I joined the family business in 1985, and we did 10 tuck-ins, as Bob would call it. Ours were more horizontally expansionable. We were getting into new businesses that were related to our existing business, but none of them vertical. We didn't go from cutting paper rolls to then making paper. We found other ways to cut paper rolls. So we expanded that business. And then over the last 20 years, I've done a variety of private equity, M&A, and my own personal M&A with my own company. And now with my clients, I've done 2 or 3 transactions.
Thanks, buddy. And Barry, what can you tell us? How did you get into this?
Like Buddy, I have more than 40 years of senior management experience. My background was originally in public accounting, but I very quickly transitioned into the private area, away from public. And my first job out of public accounting was with a public company that was merging 3 subsidiaries into one and listing them on the New York Stock Exchange. And I was the poor guy who was saddled with the responsibility of putting the whole financial model together so we could borrow $100 million from a major bank. And it turned me on. Then the company asked me to form a mergers and acquisitions group, which I did. And here I was, a 26-year-old guy flying around on a private jet, talking to CEOs of billion-dollar companies. It was pretty heady stuff at that time. I ended up getting deeply involved in the acquisition of a major engineering company in Pittsburgh and doing most of the due diligence and the financial side of the deal while my boss negotiated the price. After that, I went to ADP, did a deal in Nashville, and found myself as a senior financial executive constantly involved in mergers and acquisitions. Most of my career has been in growth companies, and they were growing either organically or through acquisitions. So I've been deeply involved in most of my 40 years, including as a financial advisor for about the last 10 years. So I hope I can impart some of my good and bad experiences to all of you today.
All right. So let's segue right into the point here. We're here to hear about bad things that did happen, bad things that hopefully didn't happen. And why don't we start with Barry? What kind of mistakes have you seen? What kind of mistakes have you avoided? What kind of mistakes do you think that other people can avoid if they only knew things that you knew going into all this?
I think it's not so much a question of knowing what I know. It's the question of going into a deal with your eyes open. A deal is a business transaction. It's not an emotional transaction. Now, most of my experience has been on the buy side. I haven't sold very many companies, but my big fear has always been that the decision maker, who in my case was mostly the CEO, would fall in love with the deal regardless of what the facts showed. And one that was a bad deal was a young industrialist out of Switzerland who was a client of mine, wanted to buy a major magnesium die casting company based in Canada. And we went up and met with their senior management in a whole group and to do due diligence. And it was very clear after about 20 minutes into their presentation that they were overpricing the company by about $200 million. And we tried to convince the industrialist who was our client not to do the deal, to back away, that they were not selling it because they were good guys. They were selling it because they were scared. And if you waited, you were going to get a much better price. He didn't listen. He went ahead and did the deal. Of course, and those were the days where the Icelandic banks were throwing money at everybody. So here was a Swiss guy borrowing money from an Icelandic bank to do a deal in Canada. And about 3 years later, the business went bankrupt. He lost his interest. It was a total waste of time. I think if he had listened or walked away, he'd have gotten himself a much better deal, and it might have worked out a lot better. It was a shame because it was a lot of effort in that one. So I think it brings out the point that I made in my little blurb, is that don't fall in love with a deal. Do the due diligence, follow the facts. Even though you may want a deal deeply, be prepared to walk away. It's the only way to do a deal that works.
So Barry, if I could just jump on, because I want to make sure no one walks away with I want to give a different perspective, if that's okay. I completely agree with you. You can't fall in love with the deal. You make terrible economic mistakes. But I also want to say that when you're buying a family-run business, it very much is an emotional decision. And if you're in a situation, whether you're buying or selling, you have to consider the emotions of all the stakeholders. You're purchasing a company where people have tremendous pride in what they've built. They're concerned about their family legacy, and we have to approach both buying and selling, keeping in mind the very personal pride issues that a business owner has. And think about it. You've built this thing, you've been running it for years, you've got your team together. And Barry's 100% correct. A business transaction is a business transaction, but we're not saying emotions don't matter. Emotions are incredibly important in getting the people to the table to start the conversation.
Bob,
Certainly in a family run, in a family acquisition, which is where I have a lot of my experience came from that world.
I've only done one family business acquisition, and you're right. My comment about emotion was by the buyer. Is really don't fall in love with the deal. You have to be very aware.
And I totally agree with that. Yeah.
You have to be very aware of the seller's emotions, and you have to play to it. It's a very important aspect. I totally agree with you.
There's something I'd like to add. I was at a conference yesterday. For those of you on Long Island, Compel had their economic summit yesterday. And one of the things one of the keynote addresses touched on was that even when transferring a family business without like selling it to outside parties, you should also look at it this way. And they said that the second or third, whatever generation person who's taking over a business from their parent should look at the business and say, would I buy a business like this? Is this a business worth buying? One of the speakers said that, and this is also an estate planning type thought, that one of the speakers mentioned that he said that when his father, when it was time to kind of think about transitioning the family and the business, his father gave him cash and gave his brother cash, and then asked them if they wanted to take that cash, give it back, and buy a piece of the business. He said yes. His brother said no. His brother invested in real estate or whatever, and he slowly bought out his father's business. So that was something interesting.
What a great idea. Boy, that's super creative.
Yeah, very creative.
I wish I would have thought of that.
It is a really good idea. And Gershon, just to stay in this theme, because I love the softer side of business and those parts of it. Also to Barry's point, when you're doing an acquisition, it's really important to stay disciplined, very disciplined in your approach to the acquisition, and even afterwards. So let's say you've done the acquisition, you've now got two sets of systems, right? One of the mistakes that you can make, if you've purchased a company because they have better systems than you do, by all means, take on their systems, try and integrate them. But if you're a merger of equals, or you're buying a smaller company and your systems are better, don't fall in love with their systems, with the little things, and try and bring those small things that they do a little bit better. It's really easy to say, wow, I want to take the best of both companies and put it together. But sometimes your operating system is built in such a way that it's bolted together perfectly. And when you put some other concept in and try to accomplish that, it doesn't work. So by all means, learn from the acquired company, try and figure out how to put those things into your system. but piecemealing systems will cause an acquisition to fail. And that's a mistake that I've seen many times where we took an acquired company and we liked a couple of things that they did and didn't actually figure out the cost of what it would take to integrate those and the interruption it would take to the core business. You want to make sure that that cash flow golden goose that you have doesn't get interrupted by acquisition noise.
So I want to tag on to the softer side, because I think Bob would agree that I'm not the softer side guy. I'm the other guy who's ruthless about it. And ruthlessness comes from experience. And in the M&A business, experience matters. And if you haven't bought a company, especially of a meaningful size, and don't know what to do when you get it, you are going to fail. So I was in a transaction where the company that I bought, or that I ran, was bought by a private equity firm. And the private equity firm looked at us as the platform, and then they quickly bought 2 more companies, and we went out and borrowed $100 million to acquire those companies and refinance all of the balance sheets of the companies. I was the CFO and the COO of the new company, and my boss was the CEO, and we won't talk about him except that he had never done this before. And so he didn't understand that in a roll-up, and I want Bob to comment on this when I'm done, in a roll-up, you have to do 2 things. You have to grow the business to get out of debt, and you have to cut costs. You have to eliminate that extra overhead so that you've got a little bit of extra money to fund that growth. And my boss was not ruthless enough to look at 2 management teams and say, okay, well, I like Buddy, but maybe Bob is better. So I'm going to get rid of Buddy and choose Bob, or I'm going to choose this system over that system. He wouldn't make those decisions. And within 6, we made our numbers the first year. That's easy because I never would do a deal if the first year wasn't in the bag anyway. But the second year was a nightmare. And so I'd love Bob to comment, or Barry to comment on that sort of concept.
Oh, Buddy,
roll-ups.
Totally agree. When we did an acquisition, in order to make the numbers work, you've got your targets, earnings, you've got your pro forma adjustments, and then you get your pro forma earnings. Everybody knows you can't deposit a pro forma earning. You can only deposit what you actually earned, right? So the only way to make the deal work is we would put together a timetable, a schedule as to what, and we track the cost cuts by week. And you have to be a little maniacal about that. And sometimes you have to make some tough decisions, but you wouldn't have bought the company if it wasn't going to return a certain cash flow to you. So you don't want to change your mind. Now, there are things that happen. Different people quit. You've got to slide people into other positions. But at the end of the day, you've got to turn those pro forma earnings into real earnings on a time frame with maniacal, every week, sit down, where am I? And the other thing too is you got to make sure you factor in the costs of the cost savings. You've got to factor in the severance. You've got to factor in, the retraining, all that other stuff. That's all part of the acquisition cost.
All right.
Barry nodding too. I want to hear his story.
Yeah, Barry, jump in.
I think what you said is absolutely right. I mean, you really have to be ruthless, and sometimes it's really painful. But if you don't do it, you fail. That there has to be a reason why you bought a company, and you have to live with that reason all the way through. You can't buy it and then ignore it. I remember buying one. We wanted my parent company was a Japanese company, and they wanted to buy a very, very high-profile hi-fi company in the U.S. And they drove me crazy to go buy it, so I bought it. And 2 weeks after we bought it, they ignored it. They figured, okay, we bought it, it can't be very good. And they really, really ignored it. It was a terrible shame. We eventually sold the company. But it's guys who wanted to buy a company who had probably no business buying a company. Mergers and acquisitions are not, back in those days, were not a very big thing in Japan. It was very, very rare, both as a buyer and a seller. That's kind of changed, but back then it was kind of crazy. But we've all had experiences where we've gone and bought companies, and we've all predicated the success of the deal based on the cost cuts we can get. We call it the synergies. And boy, getting those synergies is not so easy. Like Bob said, you got to be ruthless. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen.
So Bob, how do you balance the empathy with the brutality?
It's, well, I'm going to say, I'm going to say, let's not say ruthless as much as disciplined, right? You have to be financially disciplined. I don't think any of us, you know, ruthless, and I use the word as well, implies not caring, I think. And when you approach it from a disciplined perspective, and I can't emphasize this enough, honesty and talking to your people. You know, there were times where we did an acquisition and you would have two companies in the same town that you were combining together. Everybody knows, and I'll use the titles from the companies that we purchased. You know, you don't need two collection managers. You don't need two warehouse managers. You don't need two service managers. So when you buy these companies and put them together, everybody knows somebody's not going to make the cut. And what we always did in those situations was we were very, very honest. We would sit down. As soon as we were in a position to announce the acquisition, we would explain to people, this is what we're doing. This is the plan. We're doing this to make us stronger together. We're going to interview everybody and we're going to put the best team together that we can, you know, whichever company you came from. And the trick is to be honest. And also, and sometimes there's not a budget for this, but when it's possible, take care of those people that got you where you are, and they may not survive the cut. That's okay, but take care of them. Help them find new jobs. Give them a soft landing. Give them a decent amount of notice before they're terminated. Give them some severance. Put in stay put bonuses, because sometimes you need somebody for 3 months and then you don't need them. You know, be honest. Hey, you know what? You stay for the 3 months. I'm going to give you, you know, X amount of dollars for making it to the end. And just honesty is I think the way to go.
All right, let's take a break for a moment and see if we have any questions from the audience. Hey, Mike.
Yeah, I just based on the last thing that Bob had said, the trick is to be honest. Sometimes the technology of today, whatever the newer, better stuff, it's the opposite of honest. You're using like tracking software to understand if someone watched your video, when they watched it, how long did they watch it, with the goal of, you know, here's 2 hours of training. We'd like you to get this done on your own time over 2 weeks. Did they watch it? How many times did they watch it? So you kind of have to be like so sneaky. They don't even know how sneaky you are, but you're not in the same room. The guy's in Philadelphia or Denmark or something. So how do you, how are you supposed to be, now I understand the value of honesty, but you're supposed to be honest while you're like secretly tracking everything they're doing.
Well, I don't know, you know, I'm not 100% sure that I can't say I would do something 100% of the time, but I think if I was going to track people, if I would know how much, if I assign you to training and you know, and you're gonna beat me out of the time, if I can track you specifically, I would let them know, not in a negative way, but I would let them know, hey, look, just to let you know, we have systems in place. We're gonna know if you did the training. Please don't cheat. If you cheat, you cheat yourself, you cheat me. I would give that kind of a positive message that it's in your best interest to do the training. We had a situation where we were giving out bonuses. This has nothing to do with acquisitions, but we were giving out bonuses for people to complete online training that the vendor was sponsoring. So you could get certifications. You went through, you know, 3 hours of online training, you got a certification in a specific piece of equipment, and we would give you $1,000 bonus for completing the training. And we found out that the guys got together, and one person would do the training, would write down the answers, and then the other people would you know, would just go online and do the training. And it really caused me a problem, because how do I know who did it right, who did it wrong? who cheated. And that's exactly how I handled it. I put out a little newsletter and I said, hey, you know, we've heard this is going on. I kind of guilted people. I said, look, we've heard this is going on. I have a hard time believing it because, you know, I think you all have more integrity than that. And, and, you know, and if that's who you are, yeah, I mean, that's who you're going to be. There's an interesting book, and I can't remember the exact name of it or the author, but it had something to do with the cost of trust, or the value of trust, and
The speed of trust.
Speed of trust. Thank you very much. That's what it was. And what? Oh, Zig Ziglar, my hero. Love Zig Ziglar. Anyway, the speed of trust. The idea was we spend so much time and money to prevent the 2 to 3 or 5% of the people that are going to hurt us, that we end up upsetting the 95% that are doing the right thing. And you have to analyze what's going on. What are we worried about? What are we trying not to have happen to us? And is it worth it? Is it worth the cost? And those costs are part of them are calculatable and part of them are not, because part of them have to do with your culture. And when I read that book, I walked into my office the next day and I took the lock off the supply closet, because I said to myself, this is sending the wrong message. And oddly enough, all the supplies did not disappear. So
I was thinking about honesty when you brought that up, and it too has nothing to do with M&A. It has to do with what I learned after making an acquisition, which is that I bought a company for myself. And I realized that as I was being more truthful and more honest with my employees, the easier it got. So when I was younger in my career, I was a little bit less confident in my own ability to execute certain things, and I would keep things much closer to the vest. And I never lied, I just didn't tell everything. And so over time, especially when I bought my own company, I realized that every time I was more honest, the easier it got. And it got easier to actually say everything I wanted to say. Sometimes I had to learn how to say it nicer, but I like Bob's idea, and especially when I made acquisitions with my company then, when I brought new people on, I would tell them exactly what Bob was saying. I was not always the most empathetic person. It's not my personality, but at least I was getting the facts on the table so that everybody could deal with them.
I think they call it transparency today, not honesty.
Yes.
You're
Because
right.
honesty is black and white. Transparency is what I believe that you're referring to here, where we're open. We're open with people, and they appreciate it more and more.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We're old guys. We're still learning a new language.
Yeah, I'm old too, but I get it.
I'm going to have to read up on the difference between honesty and transparency. We don't have to use
Yes,
our
please
small amount
do.
of time together to get that, but I'll find out
Here's-
what that nuance is.
Well, here's what I'm basing it on. John Maxwell is one of my favorite leaders. And he was asked to write a book on business ethics. And he told his publisher, there's no such thing as business ethics. And the guy said, what do you mean? That's the hottest topic these days. He said, no, there's ethics, period. Not business ethics. You can't be one kind of ethic at work and one kind of ethic at home. You know, so that's the difference, buddy.
Okay.
It's the transparency is to be real. That's what it is.
Excellent. Excellent.
Good.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Preferably M&A, but I guess others are good too for the panel.
Could I ask an unrelated question to exactly what you've been speaking about?
Sure.
I work in the accounts receivable world, and I'm always talking to people in M&A or business, commercial realtors, anybody involved in selling these types of entities, on what do you recommend for the accounts receivable? Do you recommend that the seller keeps his AR, sells the AR, how do you guys look at that? And gals.
I've never done a transaction where I didn't keep the AR. But I never bought, everything we bought was a whole unit, right? You just pick up the unit and you're buying it. And I think it's confusing for your customers to have to worry about who they're paying. The idea is I'm very passionate about the customer experience, and the way I can keep the customer the most happy or the least confused. It's bad enough that they've now got a new company to deal with, but why would I put that? Well, you got to pay this bill to this person, this bill to this person. It just it just creates a conversation that doesn't ever need to be had. That's my personal view. And if you're worried about the working capital adjustment, just kick it 60 days down the line and true up then, and worry about the bad and good receivables at that point. That's my personal preference.
Yeah,
I
always bought assets. I always had a holdback. We always had a period of time post-acquisition where NewCo would manage and receive the receivables, and we'd audit them at the end of every 30 days. That way, if I needed to collect the receivable for them, because maybe it was somebody I knew or somebody I had a better relationship with, we all wanted to win, but there was always a holdback, and there was always a time zone, and there was pretty good transparency in what either I was buying or selling.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Hey, Gershon, if I'm happy to table a slightly different topic if you want right now. Are you ready to move to a?
Yeah, we've got plenty more M&A type questions.
Yeah.
You want to move away from M&A?
No. I want to talk about the diligence process, because we've talked about I go back to the title, mistakes that we've made, and I think the idea is to hopefully talk about parts of the acquisition process. I just want to mention that the diligence process, it's so important to have good diligence done, so you understand that what you're purchasing is what you're getting, or you want the purchaser to know what you're selling is they're getting the right things. And a lot of times you bring in an accounting firm or a diligence firm to complete the diligence process. And what I want to emphasize here is these are not inexpensive professionals, right? The diligence process can run a lot of money, and in order to get the most value for your dollar here, I recommend that you work with the diligence team and tell them what's important to you, so that you don't waste a lot of time and a lot of energy. I had a diligence team one time come back to me, and the first thing in their diligence report was they disagreed with the amortization schedule of the contract rights and the term of the and it's like, who cares? I don't care whether they're writing them off over 5 years, 3 years, 20 years. It's an accounting adjustment that we add back at the end, so it doesn't matter, right? And they had spent all this time and energy studying the amortization policy. So in an acquisition, time is your enemy. You want to get this deal closed as quickly as possible. You want as little as noise. So I would advise never winding up a diligence team and sending them and let them do what they want. You've got to meet with them, tell them what's important. I care about the age of equipment. I care about how good the receivables are. I care about how good their billing systems. Tell them what you care about. I'm not saying they don't do more than that, because they will learn more when they're in there, but direct the process. Don't give up control of your acquisition to your other professionals. Stay on top of things like diligence.
Thank you. Wow. Buddy, do you have any disasters you want to highlight? Or
I think when we decided to do this, I related the story of an acquisition that happened very early in my career, where I sent my diligence team in. They were not outside professionals, but they were on my team. And I sent my team in, and everything they did, they found a problem with. Yet, I forced my way through that process. And at the end of the day, we bought the company anyway. And within 2 years, we didn't own the company anymore because it didn't exist. Everything that we saw was bad, and everything that we said we shouldn't do, we did anyway. And so whether you use an outside professional or even your own team who knows as well as you do what's going on, we bought a complementary business. We knew what we were looking at, but we did it anyway. And, you know, basically you can't ignore the facts. They're staring you in the face all the time. And that was, I think, part of the whole genesis of this conversation is you know, what's the title of the webinar, Gershon?
How to avoid mistakes in an M&A transaction?
Right.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Be true to yourself. If it looks bad and smells bad, it's bad. Don't do it.
Got it. Now, was there anything specific to highlight there, or was just all the stuff together made it run away?
When the experts tell you that something's wrong, it's wrong. You can't talk your way out of it. So I had my VP of manufacturing auditing the inventory, and he couldn't find it all. And we made some excuse about that. And then I had my AR person pounding through the AR. And they said, well, you know, look at this. This is the Pennsylvania State Lottery doesn't pay very well. And, you know, that's not going to help us very much. And, you know, what do you think about that? And I was like, well, you know, it's a state agency. You know, we learned to do business in Canada. We can learn to do business with the state of Pennsylvania. And so you can talk your way out of almost everything. And so that's I just fell in love with the deal. I just wanted to do it. I didn't care.
Got
I
it.
should have. That was a couple $1 million down the drain.
But a good lesson and got you on this webinar.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that the panel wants to highlight on the issue of disasters, or should we run through some other topics quickly?
I got one more. And I embarrassingly made this mistake. We had a deal one time where I'm going to try and say this delicately. The legal profession is incredibly important to getting these deals done. And to Buddy's point, you have to listen to your advice from your attorneys. At the same time, this is your deal. It's not the law firm's deal. And the law firm has to know what's important to you. And I made the very costly mistake one time, and I almost lost the deal because the attorneys ended up renegotiating the deal with the other attorneys. And what started happening was time was going by. I was starting to get frustrated. The deal wasn't closing. The seller was getting frustrated. The deal wasn't closing. And we called each other up one day and said, what are you delaying the deal for? He was like, what are you delaying the deal for? And we said, okay, it's the attorneys. We got together in the attorney's office and we said, tell us what the issues are. These guys came up with 50 deal points that needed to be negotiated and resolved to close the deal. And we're like, oh, how are we going to get through 50 points? We did it in less than an hour. And the first three or four points, I'll never forget this. The guy looks at him, the seller looks at the deal points and he goes, I don't care about this. I don't care about this. I don't care about this. And then I'm like, I don't care about that. We got the whole thing down to 4 deal points. The guy on the other side of the table said, I'll take 1 and 2. You take 3 and 4. Let's go grab a sandwich and let these guys document it. And that's how we got the deal done. But that deal almost cratered because of the attorneys running amok. And we paid for all that legal work. We paid for all those hours for them to come up with the list of 50 things, of which 46 were irrelevant.
So Bob, I learned that, maybe 20 years into my career, but the first phone call I have when I hire the attorneys is this: I'll take care of the business stuff and the reps and warranties, and you take care of all that other mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
Do not cross over into that stuff. I will read the reps and warranties because I know what I'm agreeing to, and I'll deal with all the business points. You do nothing but all that crap in the back. So if you guys are looking at a business deal and it's this thick, your part of it is the first 12 pages and then about 5 pages in the middle where the reps and warranties are, and the rest of it is legal crap. So if you ever go through this, just remember that and make sure you clear that with your attorney before you hire them. If they're not willing to do that, because you know what, they're not very good negotiators.
No, they know how to hold their ground, is what they do. I can't tell you how many times I had a call with my attorney and I repeatedly said, why do I give a shit? You know, and they kept coming up with, oh, we got this. Why do I care? I don't care. You know, the issues become non-issues very quickly. But the message I'm trying to give here, I hope it came through, is it's your deal. Whatever side you're on, buy or sell, it's your deal. Listen to your professionals, ask the questions that you need to know, understand why they have a concern, but feel free to say, that's not a concern of mine. I'm not worried about that. I don't want to pay any more money to fix something that's not broken, you know, and always be responsible for your deal.
Got it. Thank you all. All right, we're going to take a break for a minute. Jennifer has a questionnaire we're going to put up, and then we'll see if anyone has any final questions.
This is a cute poll. I want to talk to Bob more.
You didn't give him none of the above. I mean,
Should we put that in?
Nice job. Nice job.
Gershon, there's one more topic I'd like to address before we leave the webinar too, that hasn't come up yet.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. When we set up the questionnaire, we didn't realize that top one, you had to answer one of them. So you do have to answer the top one to submit, but we'll email you to see if you actually want to talk to anyone. Anyway, yes, go ahead, Bob. And then we'll see if there's any final questions, and then we'll wind down.
You know, a topic came up yesterday when we were at the seminar, and I've heard this one quite a bit. And the question is, what do I do about my team? What do I do about if I'm selling, what do I do about the people I care about? And, you know, at the end of the day, when somebody writes, they can tell you anything they want, but when they write a check to you, you've lost control of that process. So I could tell you the thing that I did, and this was not a mistake. It was actually worked out really well, was I took my core team a couple of years early and I gave them employment contracts. And a lot of people don't like employment contracts for a lot of reasons, but my employment contract was very, very simple. It was a you know, upon a change of control, if they were terminated, they would get an X amount of period of severance. Now, the downside of that is your purchaser can view that as a deal cost, and it could impact the value you get for your company. On the positive side, it makes the people that you've given these deals to incredibly loyal to you, and they will work so hard for you, knowing that you're willing to take care of them in the event that you're not there. So just something to consider. It's got positives and it's got negatives, but it's a great way to protect people that have gotten you where you are. that you want to take care of longer into the future. I mean, you can always bonus them upon you getting some money. That's a nice gesture, but the gift of continued employment or a nice long severance that's on the backs of the new company is a nice thing too. Again, it could come out of your proceeds if they focus upon it and they're not happy, and it could work against you. But if you're truly concerned about your team and the people who got you there, it's a nice gift that keeps on giving. So.
Yeah, Bob, in my experience, we had when we were the seller, I was not the owner, but when we were the seller, the owner of the company had been telling everybody in the company that ultimately this business will be sold and I'm going to share in the value that we create. That was the language that he used. And he didn't ever codify it. So after the sale, and he netted a gigantic sum of money, he told me what the amounts were. He said, prepare the checks and hand them out. And I go, wouldn't you like to hand them out? He said, no. So I prepared the checks, I'm handing them out. And I would say 25% of the time I got, thank you. 50% of the time I got, huh? And 25% of the time I got, this is sharing the value that you create. Unless you codify it per Bob's thing. And yes, if you're the seller, you're going to have to pay for that. They are literally going to take it off the top, whether it's on selling price or some other part of the deal, you're going to pay for that. But unless you codify it, no one knows what they're going to get. And so just be aware that it's just not fun to do that part unless you make it easy. I did the same thing when I sold my company. Everybody knew what they were getting when they were leaving. When I left the building, like sort of like the day after they put the money in the bank, everybody else knew what they were getting. If they stayed, they got nothing. If they got a deal with the new company, they got nothing. And if they got let go, they got something.
Now, was the round of applause that you got because you were leaving or because you left them with something?
Both. I'm sure mostly it was because I was leaving and never coming back.
All right, Barry, any final thoughts?
No, I'm listening to what my compadres are saying is very interesting, and it brings up another issue of when you do due diligence, whether as a buyer or as the seller, is that if there are any issues, bring them up yourself. Don't let them surface deeply. Don't create mysteries.
Point. Don't hide anything. You're absolutely right. Because when you hide something, it hurts you bad.
Bad. Yes, it's usually looks worse than it is. And it creates much more feedback than it is really should.
No, is that transparency?
Yeah, transparency, right? Barry, some companies, and this wasn't popular when I was doing this, but it started at the end. Some companies do preemptive due diligence, right? When you're ready to sell, you do your own.
You create a book. That's right.
Your own company.
Yes.
Right. To make
very
sure.
effective way to package a sale.
Yeah.
Is it shows you're not hiding anything.
Right.
And I mean, I looked at a deal with my client from Switzerland again, up in Canada, and it was a joint venture between two major car companies. They built a plant for $600 million, and they hid from us the fact that it would never be profitable. It was an engineering disaster. And it was only because we had an inkling that something was wrong that we modeled it one night, and we discovered that it could never be profitable. And they were hiding it. It was the end of the deal. I mean, the trust was gone. There was no point in talking anymore. And a year later, they tore it down and scrapped it. So I think honesty is very important. Don't hide stuff either way.
Yeah. That's a great point. Hey, Gershon, there's another topic. We haven't almost out of time, but I can
next time.
I can handle this very quickly.
Okay.
And I'd love to hear, Barry and Buddy on this. This came up just very recently with a client of mine. The question of what is the value of an LOI versus an APA, right? An asset purchase agreement. And letters of intent are good. They tell you what people are thinking. They lay down what you think the deals are going to be. They're non-binding. I've been on transactions where you get the attorneys involved in the LOI and you end up spending tens of thousands of dollars negotiating an NOI that then gets turned into an asset purchase agreement, and then you pay for it again when you do the APA. So I've done most deals I've done either had no LOI or they had an LOI, they have a non-binding LOI that is very, very general framework. And then you go out and when you negotiate the APA, that's where you spend your legal money. I'm not sure what Buddy's thought on this or Barry's thought on that is, but
I totally agree with you, Bob.
Don't spend the money on the LOI.
I'm not a big believer in LOIs because they have no legal standing. So if you're going to do something, I agree with you. Just a two-page document saying that you're interested and what the price is based upon what you find in due diligence, and then
Right.
spend your money in the due diligence process and doing the APA. I'm with you 100%. That's absolutely right. I find that usually LOIs are noise.
The problem, Bob, these days is that, especially if I have a client who is buying companies right now, and whenever they get into an auction, part of that auction process is negotiating an LOI and then putting a deposit down around it. It's gotten.
Well, then now that has teeth.
Yeah.
That's different.
And so I have, had to coach a lot of people through LOIs because they it's either, they're trying to get a PSA or an APA done at the same time. And because that's really what it is.
Yeah.
It's just one of those agreements without all the little letters underneath it. So,
Right.
I wish it was back to the old days, and I hate to keep talking about being old, but the old days where I'd call somebody up and say, I'll give you $2 million for your business. And then you walk away and they say, that sounds okay. Or this is what I want. I mean, I sort of wish that those days were still around. Those don't exist at all anymore.
Yeah.
Do those not exist when you're dealing with smaller, less sophisticated people? Like, is this because you're dealing with private equity firms that it gets more complicated? Or if you're going down the block to buy your competitor who has another grocery store and you have a grocery store?
No, it's that way. Everybody's got a lawyer, and lawyers make money on these transaction costs. So LOI has become a normal part of the process for most legal firms. It's an extra generating process. They recommend it.
Hey, look, if it's got a deposit attached to it, I agree. You've got to spend some time on it. But if it's a non-binding, just letter agreement, I would spend way less money on it.
By the way, everyone here, just so you know, Bob puts his money where his mouth is on this. When we decided to become partners, we wrote up everything and then sent it to the attorney. We figured out what we wanted the economics of the agreement to be, and then we sent it to the attorney, who had some comments, but the attorney wasn't dictating the business end of it and didn't design the whole thing. He just made it legal.
There were no negotiations that involved the attorney. You're right.
All right. We're about to wind down. Any last question for the panel? One or two? If not, then we'll sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Everybody.
Thanks for participating. It was great to have you. And hope to talk again sometime soon.
Bye, everybody.